welcome to the last lecture on the High Renaissance, where we'll be looking at Northern Europe. So when we're considering that same area, Burgundy, Netherlands, Belgium region, we still have this extensive detail, this meticulous attention to details, the use of luminous colors. We're also going to see a new term called genre scenes, which is the desire to capture everyday life, especially after the Protestant Revolution. There's secular and religious subjects that are mixed, and there's less of an emphasis on classical style because they're farther away from Rome geographically. We're going to see woodcuts and engravings. Some of these artists had contacts with Italian artists. And then what really changes things is Martin Luther and his 95 Thesis with ushering in the Protestant Reformation. We won't really see large altarpieces or biblical scenes. And Protestantism really picks up because these Northern Europeans had been pretty oppressed by feudal systems, foreign rulers, the Catholic Church, etc. And so Protestantism becomes this form of freedom. And if we're going to talk about Northern Europe, we must talk about Albrecht Dürer. So you have several assigned resources over him to really get to know his work. This is his Adam and Eve, 1504. So he was this prolific artist. One of those prodigies. Like even as a young adult, he displayed his just innate talent. And what was neat was his dad was extremely supportive of him. His dad was a goldsmith, and he recognized his talent and helped him gain an apprenticeship with numerous incredible other artists to help hone in on the skills and create these technical skills. So we can also appreciate with how these are engravings, and so that technical skill coming from his father as a goldsmith makes sense. So etching is where it's this printmaking process in which a metal plate is covered with this wax, and you carve into the metal plate, and then ink fills the crevices and paper's applied to it, and then therefore we have our engraving. Very much trying to summarize. And there's numerous types of printmaking, etc., etc. But anyway, so what we're looking at here is one of these examples of these prints. And let's begin with, first of all, how he has signed his name. Albrecht Dürer, he's given the date, and really signifying his accomplishment as an artist and this high status that he has. And so here we have Adam and Eve from the Old Testament of the Bible, the first two humans. And of course, in Northern Renaissance style, we have numerous symbols throughout here. One of which, if you're not familiar with the story of Adam and Eve, they're tempted by this forbidden fruit. One of the theories or interpretations is by the serpent. Eve consumes it first and then gives it to Adam. So we can see Eve, she looks happy, where Adam has this a little bit of a furrowed brow and trying to determine whether this is the right thing to do or not. They have numerous animals around them, which are all extremely symbolic. For the sake of time, I'm not really going to go over these because your exam image is going to be one of his other prints, Melancholia. I want you to focus on those symbols. So here's an example of that type of etching. He always signs it. Dürer means door, and so his symbolism looks like this door. Engravings versus woodcuts. So here is Dürer. He spent some time in Rome, and so we see this shift that occurs. But here's a self-portrait where he sees himself as like this wealthier individual. He looks pretty much like like one of the nobility here. But then consider this shift. On the right is a self-portrait of him after he went to Italy. And arguably, he looks a lot like Christ with the positioning of his body, rather than this 3/4 view of his torso more frontally faced and his head more in profile. Here he is just centrally placed, facing the viewer, after seeing all these images of Christ throughout Italy. Let's just appreciate his ability to create these textures from his beard to his hair to, I mean, look at how this fur on his coat looks extremely real, to the different textures on his clothing, showing off how he can create hands well, etc. So innately skilled, just an incredibly talented artist. And so he incorporates some of these classical ideas, but without sacrificing the very Northern Renaissance style in which it was extremely popular, so he's not going to deviate from that much. The rounded cheeks, etc. That's a main key of how we can tell whether it's from Northern Europe or from Italy. But here's an Apollo Belvedere, a Roman copy of a Greek original, a really famous marble sculpture. And so he would have seen this. And we can see that with our contrapposto arm extending Adam over here, where he's picking up from those classical ideas, especially with the exaggerated muscular system, etc., where he's looking to the Italians and how they're focusing on the body, but in a little bit more of an exaggerated form here. Here's St. Jerome in his study, another famous engraving of his. And just consider how extremely detailed this is. He's not using different colors to create these different textures. This is an engraving and then printed. The texture of the wood on the ceiling versus the other textures throughout the room. So numerous people noticed this odd-looking lion right here. It's a symbol associated with St. Jerome. Many foreign animals were sketched from, let me back up. He obviously had never seen a lion, but there were copies of these books, prints of drawings of other people's drawings of these foreign animals. So let's say someone has actually seen a lion, they create some type of rudimentary sketch without much artistic skill, and then someone else may make some engraving of that for it to go to print, and then Albrecht Dürer gets that printed copy, and it's not quite accurate. Again, there weren't the concept of zoos or anything. There's even some big deal where they were trying to bring a rhinoceros up to Europe, and in order for people to see this foreign animal, it used to be called a unicorn because of its horn. And so there was a big shipwreck, and so many artists were actually disappointed about not being able to see that to draw it. Anyways, I digress. So again, I mean, he's more known for his engravings and so these prints, but he was an incredibly skilled artist in multiple mediums. With this. And so Melancholia 1 is the artwork that I really want you to know. And one of your assigned resources is a video, which I think just does an excellent job at highlighting all the many symbols throughout this image. But I want to discuss as an overview is the importance of how Albrecht Dürer is really thinking, essentially, and how we've been picking up, or we've been discussing that throughout these last couple units, and this idea of observation, of philosophy, of the rising status of the artist as this intellect, or as this intellectual, as really considering and contemplating their artworks. And consider how Raphael put himself amongst these philosophers in his school of Athens, and so they're on the same level of this. And so we see that here, where Melancholia, one of the arguments is it's representing the creative genius, and how you're trying to, like with these artists, they have these images in their head, and they're trying to bring this out on a two-dimensional form. And so there's this contemplation, or even sometimes this frustration of trying to bring that creative genius onto outside of the brain, like onto a two-dimensional surface, etc. And so we see these symbols throughout this imagery. Again, that video will really hone in on a lot of the details. But yeah, it's this. I want you to really consider as this overall theme of the artist as the creative genius. And Hieronymus Bosch, Garden of Earthly Delights. You have another short assigned resource over this, just a video. We don't really have time to go into it too much, but I want to emphasize how profound this artwork was for the time period. We look at this, and you may be familiar with Salvador Dali and Surrealism, and how that's continuously picked up by pop culture. And so we're familiar with these very odd-looking shapes and dream-like quality paintings, etc. But for this time period in 1505, this was really extraordinary. Just the oddness of this, the, again, dreamlike quality of it. This is what the Surrealists centuries later were looking to for inspiration, essentially. So you have a video about this, and consider the Arnold Feeney portrait and the Mona Lisa, and how when there's this element of unknown mystery, it just adds such a following. And so Hieronymus Bosch, so many of these different objects, etc., they have symbols or symbols, and you could do a whole iconographic analysis and still not know even or only know less than a quarter of the meaning of this painting, etc. Which I don't even think that much is known. But the mystery is what helps to engage the viewer and bring them back. And so this Garden of Earthly Delights is a part of the discussion of art history from then to the present. So an important piece. And then we have the Protestant Reformation. And so we've discussed how the Catholic Church had many corrupt practices during this time period. And Martin Luther, a monk, he recognizes this. And so he writes up this 95 Theses where he basically describes 95 issues with the Catholic Church, and how this leadership is extremely corrupt, and how it's not focused on the Bible or real Christianity. And so there's this argument that the Bible had authority in matters of religion, not the Pope, not these human leaders, that these messages were by these church authorities are not genuinely what the Bible is trying to communicate. And so what helps, part of why this argument picks up and why it is valid is because we have the creation of the printing press pretty recently. And so before, for you to hear anything about the Bible, you had to go to a church authority, sit in church and listen to a sermon by a priest. And he was reading the Latin Bible. Okay, so the Bible is only printed in Latin, which very few could actually read. And so if you wanted to know anything about the Bible, you had to hear it from someone else, essentially, from a priest. With the creation of the printing press, and under Martin Luther, he translates the Bible into German, Hebrew. Sorry, I meant part of it was originally in Greek, etc. But anyway, and so it's published and it's printed in readable language. I mean, not that the majority of the population could read, but this is profound with how people outside of the authority of the church have access to the Bible and can read it on their own and can discuss it, etc. And so really the Gutenberg press changes the world forever. This dissemination of ideas, in all senses of ideas, but especially with this Protestant Reformation, changes the world. So with Reformation art, it's this unique style. There's more of a focus on subject matter. They're using oil paint. Of course, there's a lack of nudity, unless you're talking about Adam and Eve or eroticism. And they embrace Protestant values. They aren't... again, this is one of those examples of a rejection of the previous style. So they're rejecting like the Catholic Christian art that we had seen before. I'm going to go more into Reformation art or addressing actually Reformation art with the next unit. But I want to hone in on this new idea of a genre painting. And this becomes extremely popular in the Northern Renaissance, and we'll see this with the next unit with the Reformation, Protestant Reformation. And so a genre painting is just scenes of everyday life. There's no Christian undertones here. There's no Christian or religious symbolism. Instead, what becomes popular is just focusing on everyday life in these grand pastoral landscapes, of just appreciating what's current, what's there. The rejection of these Catholic themes that we had seen before under the Catholic Church are apparent throughout Northern Europe, where they're focusing on daily life instead, the life of the people in those moments. So we have scenes of festivals, of gatherings, of day-to-day life. People enjoying themselves. And so here we have hunters in the snow. So there are numerous details throughout this artwork. I mean, here's our meticulous attention to detail, where I could cut out just little sections of this painting, and that in itself is an incredible artwork with the attention to detail. Scene of everyday life with these pastoral landscapes. And so this is a part of a series of the different seasons. He's also famous for this painting. Now let's head into England, where Hans Holbein the Younger, from the region of Bavaria, or that's where he's from, excuse me, he moves to England and he becomes an important painter. So the Protestant Revolution spreads into England as well. And so again, we're seeing this shift away from religious scenes and more onto genre scenes or portrait paintings or secular in general. And throughout this painting, we see this meticulous attention to detail. Again, he came from this region where that was an important aspect of training. And all these different textures, etc., depicted extremely well. And each of these objects are not just haphazardly placed, but they're extremely they're all symbols. So you may have noticed on the screen this odd shape right here. So what is that? So here's this new term, memento mori. It's an artistic or symbolic reminder of the inevitability of death. Now that sounds really dark. Well, this reminder of dying. But it's actually meant to do the opposite, where it's meant to remind you that death is inevitable for all of us. So let's live a good life while we can. Let's enjoy life while we can. Let's appreciate this present moment. So it's this reminder that life is short. It's this reminder to live out the life while we can. Enjoy it. And what he's done that's incredibly interesting is it's a skull, and you can only see it from this specific angle. So consider that artistic skill, how he spent that time, and it's this, again, engaging the viewer of those aha moments of where you discover this new symbol or you discover this unseen little detail that you hadn't seen before. A little up close. So you've got the globe. This is our age of exploration. People are going to different areas of the world. Think like Christopher Columbus from Spain all the way to the Americas, and all over the globe, these different European powers are sending explorers. We have this lute here, and I didn't realize the quality of this image was so poor, but there's a broken string. Some argue that that's associated with this brokenness of the church at the moment. All these different details and these scientific instruments, these study of the stars and navigation, etc. The oriental rug, again, think back to Arnold Fanny's portrait of showing wealth, of showing travel, etc. Okay, so that's the end of that lecture. If you haven't yet, please go through the assigned resources. That wraps up our High Renaissance.